Yorkshire pudding. My favorite part about them is they're never eaten alone. They're part of something bigger called a Sunday roast, a tradition in England where families would get together every Sunday to sit down to roast beef dinner. But unlike something like a dinner roll, which feels like just an add on to a meal, the Yorkshire pudding is fully integrated, being cooked in the beef drippings themselves, so it picks up all that beefy flavor. I don't even consider it a side dish, it's an integral part of that meal. So if I'm going to cook a traditional Sunday roast with Yorkshire puddings, I'm also going to want to have a traditional Yorkshire beer, like Samuel Smith's Oatmeal Stout, on this episode of Bacon and Brew. Seeing as though Yorkshire pudding almost always accompanies a roast, I have no choice but to prepare a big piece of meat as well. I don't have the budget for a standing rib roast, so I'm using a segment of the bottom sirloin known as a tritip. It's important to note that the muscle fibers in this cut actually change direction, so I'll be taking that into account when it comes time to slice. This piece looks like it came mostly trimmed, but I'm going to take off this excess piece of fat anyway. I have another plan for this. Admittedly, I am going to be bending the rules on what I'm considering a roast. Tri-tip has been popularized in California where it's served Santa Maria style, but I'll be keeping it simple, seasoning it liberally with salt, pepper, and garlic powder. I'm not going to be shy about the amount of seasoning. I'm going to need a lot to penetrate deep into the meat, and I'm making sure to coat each side evenly. I'll put this in the refrigerator uncovered to let it dry brine for a couple hours to overnight. Now I'll move on to my Yorkshire pudding batter. Some would say that this is best prepared the night before as well. Others would say that doesn't matter, but I would give it at least an hour before baking. The typical recipe is fairly simple with equal parts by volume of eggs, milk, and flour. But I typically don't measure all those ingredients by volume, so we're going to go with 4 eggs, 200 milliliters of milk. I'll whisk that to combine. And then I'll add 140 grams of all-purpose flour and half a teaspoon of salt. I'll continue whisking until I get a smooth batter, and then I'll cover it with plastic wrap to let it sit at least an hour. If I'm waiting longer than that to bake it, then I'll place it in the refrigerator, being sure to pull it out of the refrigerator at least an hour before baking. I'm going to roast my tri-tip outside of my pellet grill, so I'm going to fire that up to 225 degrees. Then I'll roughly chop some onions and carrots to create something that somewhat resembles a roasting rack. I'll cut the ends off these onions and then cut it into quarters, leaving the skin on and everything. You could use a proper roasting rack or just place your tri-tip on the grates of the pellet grill itself, but I want to collect some of the pan drippings to make a gravy. I'll get some carrots in there as well. I'll toss these with a little oil and a pinch of salt, and I'll place my tri-tip directly on top. I'll take this out to my pellet grill, but before I close the lid, I'm also going to dump in about a cup of beef stock. The beef stock should prevent the pan drippings from burning on the bottom of the pan, and it would also create some steam which would prevent browning, but I'm actually okay with that because I'm going to be using the reverse sear method, so we'll get that browning afterward. I'll place a probe into the thickest part and we'll let that go nice and slow at 225 degrees until we reach an internal temperature of 120. Now the extra bit of fat that we cut off, I could use to make some beef tallow. All I have to do is put it in the pot with a tiny bit of water and then heat it up nice and slow. As the water evaporates and the temperature rises, the fat would start to render. Now I did end up abandoning this plan prematurely because I had enough going on, but I did get a few tablespoons. I'll pour a little bit of this into the bottom of the cups of a muffin tin just to cover the bottom. This will serve as the base for my Yorkshire puddings. And that was only enough for 3, but luckily beef tallow is readily available in grocery stores. And realistically, you could use any fat to make these, but I just wouldn't call it a Yorkshire pudding. Popover will probably be the proper term if you're making it vegetarian. I'm also staggering the cups because I don't know what the Yorkshire puddings are going to do as they bake, so I want to give them room to expand. And that pan goes into a 425 degree oven to preheat as I prepare my batter. I'm going to pour this through a sieve to remove any lumps that I may have missed, and into a container with a spout so I could easily pour into the individual cups. Once my pan is preheated for 10 to 15 minutes, it's ready to bake my Yorkshire puddings. I'll just pour the batter into the hot tallow, and you notice it immediately starts to bubble up and essentially fry. Now, a lot of what I just said is debatable, but if there's one thing that all Yorkshire recipes agree on, is that you absolutely do not open this oven door for at least 20 minutes. Right now, the liquid in the batter is creating steam, causing it to rise, but if you open that oven door before it's set, it's going to collapse immediately. Your Yorkshire pudding should be fine in that time, so don't be curious. And the ones with my homemade tallow grew slower and expanded outward instead of up. So in this unexpected experiment, I actually prefer the store-bought tallow. And just in time, back outside, my tri-tip has just reached the target 120 degrees. 120 degrees is a little rare, but it's going to raise a little bit as it rests for the next 15 minutes, and then I'm going to cook it at a higher temperature to sear. Now with the liquid from my roasting pan, I'm going to strain that off, and I'm going to use this for my gravy. To make the gravy, I'm going to use the same pan I used to roast and use a little bit more of that tallow. And I'll dump in a tiny bit of flour, and that's actually more than I intended. I'll whisk that and eventually add a little bit of more tallow to make up for my excess flour. I'm going to continue to whisk and cook this roux until it reaches an amber color and cooks off all that raw flour flavor. And once that starts to pick up a little color, I'm going to add some liquid. Not my stock yet. I'm actually going to add some of our oatmeal stout. I'm actually going to be using 2 parts stock to 1 part of our stout. And now I'll dump that stock in. I also want to get a little umami flavor in there by adding a few dashes of Worcestershire sauce. If it starts to thicken up too much, then feel free to add more beef stock or just water. And now with my grill at high heat, I'll sear off this tri-tip. To encourage a better sear and create that Maillard reaction, I'm going to actually brush the surface with this with a little more beef tallow. Just be careful to manage any flare-ups when it comes time to flip. And since this is already rested, you really don't have to rest it that long again. Now this first cut looks like I'm cutting with the grain, but that's just to separate the 2 parts where the muscle fibers change direction. And then I'll cut this against the grain in relatively thin slices. And there you have it, the hero of this meal, reverse seared tri-tip. I love the reverse sear method because it enables you to hit that medium rare temperature throughout the entirety of the roast. You don't have to deal with the thick gray band around the outside. But let's not forget about the real hero of this meal, those Yorkshire puddings. These rose really nicely, creating those deep cups that'll help contain the gravy. And the texture is nice and chewy and picked up a lot of that beef flavor from the tallow. These two really are the perfect combo, and once you try Yorkshire puddings with some roast beef, it's really hard to imagine one without the other. But don't forget, we still have to include the real hero of this meal, Samuel Smith's Oatmeal Stout. This hearty stout is great with any roast, but since we used it in the cooking process itself, it's even more appropriate as part of this meal. Let's just get some of this on a plate and pick my 2 best Yorkshire puddings. And to top it off, the real hero of this meal is that stout gravy, poured out of a proper gravy boat. And despite all this, English food has somehow picked up a reputation for being bland and boring. But I challenge you to try this meal and not tell me that this is some of the best food in the world. But the real test will be when you try it with a proper Yorkshire beer, like Samuel Smith's Oatmeal Stout. The Samuel Smith Brewery was founded in 1758, and they're still following some very traditional brewing practices, even fermenting their beer in slate-lined fermenters known as Yorkshire squares. Their Oatmeal Stout is my favorite beer from them. It's a full-bodied dark ale brewed with flaked oats and has flavors of toffee and roasted coffee. Samuel Smith's Oatmeal Stout is really the perfect beer for this meal, and not just because it's brewed in Yorkshire. It's right there in the name of the meal itself. Sunday roast. Roasty flavors go so well with beef. I mean, think about that. How many times have you went out and ordered a steak boiled or microwaved? No, we need those Maillard reactions for beef. That's what we love about it so much. So pairing this with a beer like a stout that uses roasted barley to get its color and flavor just seems like a perfect fit. But roasted barley isn't the only ingredient in the beer that makes it a perfect pairing. There's also the oatmeal part of the oatmeal stout. Now, oatmeal doesn't sound like the most exciting flavor, but what it adds is mouthfeel. You may look at the color of the beer and assume that those roasted malts are going to add some astringency, but actually the oatmeal gives it this creaminess, and it actually turns out to be a sweet and full-bodied, hearty brew. Thank you for watching. Try these Yorkshire puddings at home next time you're having a roast dinner. It really is the perfect accompaniment to some roast beef. Join me next time and I'll take another one of my favorite beers and try to make the perfect pairing.